listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, it's being called Robodebt 2.0, a flawed and broken system ripping off millions of Australians from their job and support payments. We unpack the story and why there are now calls for a complete overhaul of the government payment system. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Thursday, the 7th of August. Just days out from a potential Reserve Bank rate cut, the ANZ has shocked customers with a surprise rate hike. Today, the bank announced a 0.16 percentage point increase for some variable loans, lifting the rate to 5.75%. Investment loans will also increase. The move is independent from any decision made by the RBA. The change only affects new customers. One of the killers jailed over one of Australia's most horrific crimes claims he was set up by police and wants his conviction overturned. 26-year-old Anita Cobby was walking home from Blacktown Railway Station in Sydney in 1986 when she was abducted, raped and murdered by Michael Murdoch, John Travers and the three Murphy brothers. Murdoch, who was 18 at the time of the murder, has been serving a life sentence without parole. Murdoch has been requesting police documents which have been rejected by authorities. He continues to claim he's been wrongfully convicted and sentenced on manufactured evidence. And more bombshell allegations from a new tell-all book about Prince Andrew. Extracts from the royal biography called entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York alleges Jeffrey Epstein sold secrets about Prince Andrew to various intelligence agencies. And also on an official trip to Bangkok, more than 40 women were brought to the Prince's hotel room. The book, written by royal biographer Andrew Lowney, will be released on the 14th of August. Now it's time to get into our deep dive on the widespread and in some circumstances unlawful cancellations of government payments for millions of Australians. We speak with anti-poverty advocate Kristin O'Connell, who says some of our most vulnerable are being unfairly targeted by a broken system that is allegedly being exploited by some operators, costing taxpayers billions of dollars. Kristin, thanks so much for joining us. This seems like a massive story that's really gone under the radar at the moment. Can you explain exactly what's happening with these job seeker payments?
Yes. At the moment, we're seeing very early stages of what we think will be a big story about how the compulsory activities that people on some Centrelink payments have to do to keep getting their payment are being used to mistreat, threaten, bully, abuse, manipulate people. And for some people, that has ended in their Centrelink payment being cancelled. And it's been cancelled unlawfully for at least 1,000 people. But we do think that's the tip of the iceberg. And the Commonwealth Ombudsman, who had a report out yesterday, is going to be looking further into this over the next few months.
So just to break it down for us, Kristin, this is in regards to job seeker recipients that to get their payments to come through correctly, they have to meet a number of criteria. And then because they haven't met that criteria, the system has just basically automatically cut off those payments. Is that correct?
Well, this is the thing, right? It's actually not because people haven't met their requirements. And this actually affects people on a number of Centrelink payments. You've got people on job seeker, people on the parenting payment, people on the disability support pension, and people on special benefits. So it's quite a large group of people. We're talking about roughly 800,000 people at the moment. And what is supposed to happen, I guess, is that you break their rules, which if you've been in the system, you'll understand a lot of those rules are really a huge just waste of time. They sap your energy, they achieve nothing, and they kind of get in the way of you doing things that you need to in your life, including things that might help you get a paid job. But if you say miss an appointment with someone who theoretically is supposed to help you get a job, but in reality actually just ticks a box or tries to push you into something that you don't need or won't help you so that they can make money, what you can end up with is your payment suspended because they decide you weren't submissive enough or they fail to keep an appointment that they've scheduled with you. And That's the vast majority of the penalties that get applied to people. It's about 70% of the penalties are just from missing an appointment or someone saying that you missed an appointment. And when that happens, you get a demerit, a little bit like your driver's license. You start to rack those up. I'll give a little example of one a couple of months ago. A person who had an adverse reaction to some medication, ended up in hospital, and ended up having a social worker advocate for her who worked at the hospital because her job seeker payment got put on hold. The social worker was really amazed at how unfairly the job agency treated this person. And in the space of a few weeks that she was in hospital, she had 4 of these penalties applied and 4 demerits applied, which she's had to go through a huge battle to try and get removed. And it's been months now. What that means is that she's progressed along this traffic light system. She started with a couple of demerits. You get then into something called the warning zone. Then you get into the penalty zone. And what is then usually happens is your Centrelink payment gets cut. And for people who don't know, the job seeker payment is a couple of $100 a week below the poverty line. It is not easy to live on. And so when that payment gets reduced, you have no breathing room. And then over time, what they've decided, you're very bad, you've done all the wrong things, and then they cut you off completely and you have no income for 4 weeks. That last bit of the system at the moment has been stopped because of these unlawful payment cancellations. But all those first steps where your payment gets put on hold, it gets delayed, you miss your rent, you can't buy food, all of that's still on, and it's still affecting about 100,000 people a month.
I'm seeing reports now coming out, Kristin, that this has the hallmarks of another Robodebt disaster. Do you think it's got the widespread ramifications of that disastrous scenario?
I think there are a lot of parallels between what we're seeing now and what happened with Robodebt. It is going to be harder for those of us who've had payment suspensions to prove the kind of harm that it's caused us. With Robodebt, people had a letter and it had a number on it. All we've got is piles of text messages, right? I'm lucky I haven't had to do these compulsory activities for a while, but those text messages that rack up, it's really hard to quantify and put a dollar value on the distress that it causes when you get that text, the amount of time you have to waste trying to get the job agency to fix it if they made a mistake, or to treat you fairly and in line with the law if they did it on purpose, which happens a lot. And people have to go through really onerous processes and then often don't even get that demerit removed. And that's what leads to these further payment consequences. So I think there are millions of people who've been affected by this. There are potentially millions of people who have unlawfully had their payment put on hold. But in terms of trying to get justice and to get compensation for all of that harm, I think it's going to be an uphill battle, but we're going to fight it.
There seems to be systematic flaws with the entire system, regardless of which government is actually monitoring this, Kristin.
Yeah, I mean, in one sense, the purpose of the system is what it does, right? This has happened since the system started. It actually even happened in the version of compulsory activities before the targeted compliance framework. These activities have existed for a long time. That's just the current legal name for it. But when we talk about the systemic flaws, I guess the idea behind this system was to pressure people and push people off payments, even if they didn't have a paid job. And it is achieving that. Sometimes it's achieving that unlawfully, but often it's achieving it lawfully. And, we have supported people who have found that it's so distressing to have to deal with the compulsory activities and the abuse from job agencies that they have ended up deciding that it was better for their well-being to sleep rough and to not be able to pay rent than to continue trying to jump through all of those hoops. So it is flawed in the sense that I think the entire idea behind it is flawed in terms of the way, the IT systems are working, which is what a lot of the conversation has been about. It is actually, the IT is working as it has been designed. It just hasn't been designed to align with the law.
So you're talking about the IT system there. Is this run by artificial intelligence? Is that what's happening here? Is that a possibility or a concern?
No, there are a lot of humans making decisions here that are leading to these penalties and that have caused those unlawful cancellations. I think that the department responsible for this system and Minister Amanda Rishworth would find it really convenient if we all got distracted and believed that this was just happening all automatically. But as I mentioned earlier, the vast majority of these suspensions are applied by a person who works at a private job agency. They're not even a public servant. They're really protected from accountability, I guess. And they have to click a button for that payment to go on hold. That's a human being doing that. Now, there's no, I call it frictionless. Like the second they click that button, your payment is on hold. So there isn't any checks or balances in place. But the IT enables them to do it, I suppose. The IT is being used to enable this as opposed to being the root cause of it.
And according to The Guardian, a Deloitte report into that IT system that you've referred to earlier called the TCFs actually found that the whole system needs to be overhauled. And you've just mentioned there does seem to be some serious gaps in the system which people are exploiting for all the wrong reasons, that's causing serious physical and mental harm to millions of Australians.
Yes. And yeah, just to be clear, I think, what we're saying is that obviously the people who run the job agencies, in fact, even more than the workers themselves, are the ones who are exploiting that system. And I think also at the moment we are starting to hear some language from the employment department and from government to suggest that it's welfare recipients exploiting the system. That's not the case at all. And that report that you mentioned, we have received some information about it. What we know is that it's suggesting investing extraordinary amounts of money in trying to fix these problems. And this system is already costing $4 billion a year overall. It's $4 billion a year to keep the punishment tap turned on. And then what? We're going to invest more money in it, which is only to ensure that we are lawfully harming people. It's not, I think, something that the community expects the government to spend its money on at a time when it says it can't afford to do other things that would actually benefit us all.
So, Kristin, what would your advice be to someone who is listening to this in regards to if they're in this same scenario, if they know someone in this scenario? It's incredibly difficult. We've all been there trying to lodge complaints or trying to fix what seems to be a completely broken and flawed system. What advice would you give to people?
First and foremost, if you have been affected by a payment cancellation, consider whether everything in that process was fair and reasonable. The Commonwealth Ombudsman has said the department does not just need to treat people and make decisions lawfully. They also need to make decisions fairly and reasonably. So you might be entitled to back pay or compensation if you have had your payment reduced or cancelled and you thought something in that process wasn't fair or didn't make sense. So in that case, people can contact the Employment Department. Hopefully it's easy to Google. It's called the National Customer Service Line. And you can contact to ask for information about whether you're entitled to compensation. And people can also contact organisations like the one that I'm with, the Anti-Poverty Centre, and to ask us, or let us know that this has affected you. And that's talking about the payment reductions and payment cancellations. When we're talking about those payment suspensions, I think at the moment what we really want people to do is make sure that the Ombudsman is aware, that the community is aware, that the media is aware, and that politicians and the Employment Department are aware every single time there is an unfair payment suspension. So please share your story if you feel comfortable doing so on social media. I know it can be hard when you're a welfare recipient because it can be really stigmatizing and people will call you a dole bludger sometimes. So please only do it if you feel comfortable and you mentally well enough to do it. But it's so important that we draw attention to how these payment suspensions are being used and weaponized to punish people who are relying on payments for their survival. And it is, the Commonwealth Ombudsman noted that it is a government policy and the Reserve Bank's aim to have 4% of people unemployed. There will always be many hundreds of thousands of people without a job. Even if we're in a great, if we would be a great employee, there'll still be people without a job. So none of this makes sense. Please do draw attention to what's happening to you if you can. Get in touch with the Anti-Poverty Centre if you want some support doing that, and contact the National Customer Service Line that's run by the Employment Department if you have had some unfair treatment.
We really appreciate you shining a light on this really important issue affecting so many Australians. Kristin, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
That was Kristin O'Connell from the Anti-Poverty Centre. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast, and we'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.